The general warm-up begins on the stationary spin bike and is performed at a light to moderate intensity to gradually increase our heart rate, blood flow, and overall muscle temperature. Before beginning, it is important to properly set up the bike to ensure both comfort and efficiency during the movement. The seat height should be adjusted so that the pedal is at the bottom of the stroke. There is a slight bend at the knee rather than fully extended leg. This allows for the optimal force production while reducing unnecessary strain on your knee and ankle. Foot placement is also important. The feet should be positioned so that the ball is centered over the pedal, allowing for effective force transfer through each joint. We don't want to be pushing through our heels. Posture is also expected to be maintained throughout the warm-up. This can be done as we control our spine in a neutral and upright position while our shoulders are relaxed and our core is slightly engaged. We should still be able to maintain a comfortable conversation while we're performing this. During execution, the pedal motion should be smooth and cyclical. Think about pushing down and through the pedal and pulling back up in a continuous motion, rather than just stomping downward. And remember not to push through those heels. This allows for the standardization of the reps and helps create more efficient movement pattern and evenly distributes muscular force between the quads, the hamstrings, and just the hip flexors as a whole.
I now twist the knob to the left to increase the resistance on the bike. I made sure that I was ready for this as it was about halfway through the full biking process, maybe even a little bit farther.
As the resistance is increased, our goal is to maintain cadence and flow. We are not going to allow the pedals to slow, and we're not going to deviate from our reps. We're going to maintain this consistency throughout the entirety of the movement. I'm also paying attention to my breathing here. Breathing should still remain steady and controlled, avoiding the short and shallow breaths. This also helps cardiovascular efficiency and prevents unnecessary tension in the upper body. During this general allowing for
the main idea right now is to
breaths,
really focus on our lower body.
Yes, our core is naturally going to be involved, but this is going to really incorporate a lot of adductors, hamstrings, calves, and quads, really going through that triple extension motion, which happens a lot during our many dynamic movements or compound movements. Because today focuses on a lot of full body content, I also added in a slight lift off of the seat where I am going to engage my core along with a lot more of the stabilizers in the legs to just maintain a consistent, controlled motion throughout this sequence, while engaging a large quantity of your core during this too. As you can see, I am about to begin, and I didn't maintain it for too long, as it wasn't really necessary, as I have a lot of blood flow into my legs and my abs as well, on top of hip flexors. At this point, heart rate should be elevated, blood flow should have increased, and the body has warmed up to a warm temperature, ready for a movement-specific preparation. I'll now transition into a dynamic warm-up to further prepare the joints and muscles for the exercise of the main workout today. As we complete the general warm-up, I'm transitioning into a dynamic warm-up portion of the session. The purpose of the dynamic warm-up is to further prepare the body for resistance training by increasing joint mobility, activating the major and minor muscle groups involved in the workout, and reinforcing the specific movement patterns that will be used later during the session. Unlike the general warm-up, which is more focused on gradually increasing heart rate, blood flow, and muscle temperature, the dynamic warm-up is more specific towards the movements of that day. Here, the emphasis is controlled range of motion, coordination, and activation. Each movement is specific and with intent and controlled, not too fast. The goal is to improve readiness for exercise without creating much fatigue. The first movement of the dynamic warm-up is arm circles. This exercise is used to prepare the shoulder complex for the upper body exercises in the main workout today, especially pressing, stabilization, and pulling movements. To begin, I position the arms out to the side with the relatively small arm circles. As I continue, I gradually increase the diameter of the circles. This is important because it allows the shoulder joint to progressively move into a larger range of motion rather than just beginning in it instantly. We are able to gradually increase the size of the circles. I can ease the shoulder into a greater mobility while maintaining control of the movement. Next, in my dynamic warm-up, I'm using resistance bands to prepare the shoulder complex through movements in the transverse plane, emphasizing both posterior and anterior musculature. I begin with the band pull-aparts, performing shoulder horizontal abduction. This movement targets the posterior deltoid, middle trapezius, the rhomboids, while reinforcing scapular retraction. The goal here is to activate the scapular stabilizers and improve neuromuscular control of the upper back, which is essential for maintaining proper posture, shoulder positioning during sequential lifts. I then transition into placing the band behind my back and then performing a converging chest press. This involves shoulder horizontal adduction, primarily activating the pectoral majors, anterior deltoids, and the triceps brachii. The band provides variable resistance, increasing the tension as I move through the concentric phase, which enhances muscular activation control at the end range. By pairing horizontal abduction and adduction, I'm dynamically repairing both of the agonist and antagonist muscle groups. This helps increase tissue temperature, improve the joint stability, and optimize movement efficiency in accordance with the dynamic warm-up. Next, I'm performing inchworms as a part of my dynamic warm-up to integrate both upper and lower body while enforcing core stability. I begin by hinging at the hips and reaching toward the ground, emphasizing hip flexion while maintaining a neutral spine. This lengthens the hamstrings and promotes mobility through the posterior chain. From there, I walk my hands forward into a plank position where my shoulders are flexed, and then I reach into a pull or a put. As we perform these, let's make sure that on the eccentric phase, we are breathing in, and on the concentric phase, we're breathing out. It may be a little ambiguous, but as we are climbing up the ladder, that is our concentric, and the bottom is our eccentric. There is a lot of moving facets, and it's a lot of multi-joints being worked in this moment, which is going to be great for our furthering movements for the rest of the day as we go into compound movements that are going to enhance our athletic performance. As you can see, we did a slow count of 8 repetitions, there and back, with a push-up at the very bottom. Flexion and extension swings performed for 15 reps on each leg. This movement occurs primarily in the sagittal plane and is used to improve mobility, coordination, and muscular adaptation at the hip specifically. To begin, I stabilize on one leg and one opposite leg, forward into hip flexion and backward into hip extension. The movement should come primarily from the hip joint while the torso remains relatively stable. From a biomechanical standpoint, the primary actions are the hip flexors, extensors, occurring about the medial lateral axis. As the leg swings forward, the hip flexors are more active. As it swings backwards, the gluteal muscles and hip extensions become more involved. The opposite leg moves forward into hip flexion and backwards into hip extension. The movement should come primarily from the hip joint while the torso remains relatively stable. From a biomechanical standpoint, the primary actions here are the hip flexion and extension occurring about the medial lateral axis. As the leg swings forward, the hip flexors are more active, and as it swings backward, the gluteal muscles are more active, and the hip extensors become more involved. Although movement takes place in the sagittal plane, there is also an important element to the frontal plane stability. This is, as you can see, the momentum in my front of my body falling into the frontal plane. Next, I'm performing feet-elevated glute bridges to activate the posterior chain, with an emphasis on hip extension and lumbopelvic stability. By elevating my feet, I increase the range of motion at the hip joint, requiring great activation of the glutes throughout the movement. From the starting position, I drive my heels and extend the hips upward, focusing on producing force through the hip extension rather than compensating with lumbar extension. At the top of the movement, I am aiming for full hip range of motion while maintaining the neutral spine. The glute max is the primary agonist, while the hamstrings assist as synergists. The core musculature is also being worked, while the rectus abdominis and transverse abdominis work isometrically to stabilize the pelvis and prevent excessive anterior pelvic tilt. Next, I'm using banded monster walks and lateral side steps to target the hip adductors and reinforce lower stability
in multiple phases of motion. For the monster walks, I'm moving forward, backwards, and against the resistance bands, maintaining tension throughout. I'm also going to have a slight bend at the knee while I'm maintaining the transitional force along this pattern. That slight hip hinge is going to avoid excessive trunk movement to ensure the load stays specifically on my lower extremities. The primarily involves the hip adduction and extension targeting the glute medius and maximus. Throughout both exercises, I keep constant tension on the band and controlling each step to promote neuromuscular activation and proper movement mechanics. As you can see now, we step into the lateral side raises or steps. I still have a slight hinge at the hips, and maintain a consistent stride. These lateral side steps primarily occur in the frontal plane, involving hip abduction at the hip joint. The glute medius is the primary agonist with assistance from the glute minimus. The stance leg works isometrically to stabilize the pelvis, while the stepping leg performs concentric and eccentric actions. The core musculature stabilizes the trunk to maintain proper alignment and prevent compensatory movement. This movement increases activation of the hip adductors, improves neuromuscular control, and enhances pelvic stability. Step-ups are a unilateral, multi-joint movement performed primarily in the sagittal plane. The lead leg drives the movement through triple extension, hip extension, knee extension, and ankle plantar flexion. The primary agonist includes the glute medius, the quadriceps, and assistance from the hamstrings and gastrocnemius. The trailing leg contributes minimally, ideally acting strictly as just balance and assist. Additionally, the glute medius of the stance leg works as isometrically to stabilize the pelvis and control the frontal plane movement. Step-ups closely replicate functional movement patterns such as stair climbing, running, walking at higher frequencies, make them highly transferable into daily activities and sports performance specifically. As a part of our dynamic warm-up, they enhance our neuromuscular adaptation, coordination, improve single leg stability, reinforce proper force production through triple extensions in these unilateral movements. They also help address bilateral imbalances and prepare the lower body for more demanding compound movements like squats, lunges, and just also explosive activities. So this can be used for not only a heavy lift session, but a highly cardio, sprint, power-based session. So a lot of those can be involved. There's a lot of versatility with this movement. As we switch into our final dynamic warm-up, hip openers are a dynamic mobility movement that primarily involve hip flexion, abduction, and external rotation at the hip joint, followed by extension as they return to the starting position. This movement targets muscles such as the iliopsoas during the lift phase, the glute medius, the glute max, external rotators within the hips. The stance leg works isometrically to stabilize the pelvis, while the core musculature maintains the trunk control and prevents excessive movement. This movement improves hip mobility, increases range of motion, and enhances the neuromuscular control of the hip and joint.
For our first movement, we will perform an upper body bodyweight calisthenics movement performed with 3 variations. The first variation is knee-assisted push-ups, which targets the pectoralis major, anterior deltoids, and triceps, while also engaging the core for stability and your scapula for retraction. To set up, the hands are placed slightly wider than shoulder width, the shoulders are stacked over the wrists, and the knees are to remain in contact with the ground, which shortens the lever arm and reduces the overall load. The movement occurs about a medial-lateral axis, and the core musculature works isometrically to maintain trunk alignment and prevent excessive lumbar extension. This variation served as a starting point for allowing proper technique and control while working against a
In the plank, I am actively engaging the rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, and obliques to resist the lumbar extension, while the serratus anterior and scapular stabilizers maintain proper shoulder positioning. This reinforces trunk stability and scapulothoracic control. Then, I walk my feet towards my hands, again emphasizing hip flexion and hamstring mobility before returning to the standing position. Overall, intros serve as a dynamic movement that increases core temperature, enhances mobility in the hips, hamstrings, and improves neuromuscular coordination across multiple joints. This specifically aligns with movements that are going to cross multiple joints. This is going to prepare us for those movements going ahead.
boost load. The second variation of this upper body bodyweight calisthenics push-up is now progressing to the standard push-up. In this position, the body forms a straight line head to heels, requiring full body stabilization. This is also going to lengthen the moment arm and making the force increased. Compared to the knee version, this variation increased resistance and requires greater activation of the core, glutes, and stabilizing musculature. During the movement, this third and most advanced variation of the upper body bodyweight calisthenics push-up performed with the feet elevated. Elevating the feet increases the percentage of the body weight being supported by the upper body, placing greater demand on the chest, shoulders, and triceps. The movement pattern remains consistent with elbow flexion and extension during the sagittal plane about the medial lateral axis, and the shoulders are contributing through the horizontal and adduction and abduction. However, due to the increased load and the altered body angle, there is a greater emphasis on the anterior deltoids in this movement and the upper chest, along with the increased demand in core stability, just for the proper alignment.
The bodyweight calisthenic lunge is a lower body, multi-joint, unilateral movement that targets strength, balance, and neuromuscular control. It's demanding, and I'll be demonstrating these three variations: alternating forward lunges, foot elevated lunges, and walking lunges. The biomechanics that are involved are going to be, during the eccentric phase, as I lower my body, the hip moves into flexion, controlled eccentric by the glutes and the hamstrings. The knee moves into flexion, controlled by the quadriceps, and the ankle moves into dorsiflexions, controlled by the plantar flexors. During the concentric phase, returning to standing essentially, the hip extends via glutes, the knee extends via quads, and the ankle plantar flexes to assist in force production. There is also a significant frontal plane stabilization where the glutes act to resist hip adduction and maintain proper knee alignment. The core musculature functions isometrically to stabilize the trunk and maintain posture during this too. Because there is a reset between reps, it reduces the overall stability demand compared to other dynamic variations. As we can see in this setup, the foot elevated lunge, elevating the lead foot increases the range of motion at both the hip and knee joints. This is going to result in a greater mechanical tension placed on the glutes and the quads, particularly in the lengthened position. As the knees are also pushed over the toes, we are increasing the demand for ankle dorsiflexion and challenges overall dynamic stability due to the altered base support. This variation increases both mobility demand and stability demand, making it both advanced than the forward standard lunge. From a muscle recruitment standpoint, the quadriceps act as a higher primary agonist for the knee extension, the glutes is the primary agonist for hip extension, the hamstrings function as a synergist, assisting in hip flexion while also contributing to joint stability. The gluteus maximus and minimus act as stabilizers, preventing excessive hip adduction and maintaining proper femoral alignment. This variation also increases the moment arm at the hip and knee, meaning that muscles must generate more torque to control and reverse the movement. As a result, it is more effective for developing strength through a deeper range of motion. Additionally, the elevated position challenges dynamic postural control, requiring greater activation to the core musculature as well, including the rectus abdominis, obliques, and spinal erectors to maintain an upright torso and prevent excessive forward lean. Overall, this variation is highly effective for improving mobility, stability, and strength simultaneously. In this final lunge variation, I'm performing walking lunges, which are biomechanically similar to the previous lunge variations, still occurring in the primarily sagittal plane with hip and knee flexion and extension, and also ankle dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. However, what makes this variation unique is the continuous cyclical nature of the movement, which increases the demand for dynamic balance, coordination, and neuromuscular control, since there is no reset in between these repetitions. One key advantage of walking lunges is the versatility in terms of internal loading. While this is a bodyweight version, this movement can be progressed by adding dumbbells, which increases overall load while also challenging grip and stability, a barbell, which shifts the load to an axial skeletal, and increases total force production demands, or even a sled, which introduces a horizontal resistance and emphasizes force application through the ground. These loading variations change the force vector and stability demands, but the fundamental joint actions and muscle recruitment patterns remain pretty similar. Overall, walking lunges serve as a more advanced progression by combining strength, stability, and continuous movement. This next movement is an upper body multi-joint pushing exercise using a dumbbell modality. Its primary targets are the shoulder complex, elbow joint, and I'll be demonstrating 3 variations. In this first variation, I'm performing a seated bilateral dumbbell shoulder press, where both arms are moving simultaneously from a stable, supported position. From a biomechanical standpoint, this movement occurs primarily in the frontal plane, involving shoulder abduction and elbow extension. During the concentric phase, the deltoid, particularly the anterior and middle fibers, act as the primary agonist to the triceps act as the agonist for the elbow extension, and during the eccentric phase, the same muscles act eccentrically to control the lowering of the dumbbells. Because I'm seated with back support, this reduces the need for core stabilization and minimizes contribution from the lower body, and allows for greater focus on the local muscular strength and hypertrophy of the shoulder complex. Additionally, performing this movement bilaterally allows for greater force production since both limbs are contributing simultaneously, and it enables the use of heavier loads compared to unilateral variations. In the second variation, I'm performing a seated unilateral dumbbell shoulder press, using one arm at a time. The joint actions remain the same, shoulder abduction and elbow extension, but the key difference is the increased demand for stabilization and neuromuscular control. Because the load is now asymmetrical to the body, we must resist the lateral flexion and rotation. This increases activation of the core musculature, including the obliques and stabilizers, to maintain the upright position and posture. From a muscle action standpoint, the working arm relies on the deltoid and triceps as primary movers. The contralateral core musculature acts as stabilizers to resist unwanted leaning on the side. This variation also helps address bilateral strength asymmetries, since each arm must force independently without compensation for the other side. In this final variation, I'm performing standing bilateral dumbbell shoulder press, which introduces a full body stabilization component. The primary joint actions remain consistent, shoulder abduction and elbow extension, but now the movement requires integration of the entire kinetic chain, specifically the lower body and posterior chain. Because I'm standing, the body must maintain balance and posture, increasing activation of core musculature, including the rectus abdominis, obliques, spinal erectors, and the lower stabilizers like the glutes and the quads. This variation places greater emphasis on force transfer, meaning the body must efficiently transmit force from the lower body through the trunk to the upper extremities. There is also an increased demand in proprioception and postural control, as the center of mass is less stable compared to when there's a seat. Overall, the standing bilateral press is the most integrated and functionally demanding variation, combining upper body strength with total body stability and control. This next movement is a lower body multi-joint hip hinge exercise using dumbbells. It primarily targets the posterior chain, and I'll be demonstrating 3 variations. In this first variation, I'm performing bilateral dumbbell Romanian deadlift. To execute the movement, I start by standing tall, holding the dumbbells at the sides. I initiate the movement by hinging at the hips, pushing them backwards while maintaining a slight bend at the knees. The dumbbells travel vertically down along my thighs as my torso leans forward, and I reverse the motion by driving my hips forward to return to the starting position. From a biomechanical standpoint, this occurs primarily in the sagittal plane about the mediolateral axis, with an dominant action being hip flexion and extension. During the eccentric phase, the hips move into flexion. The glutes maximus and hamstrings act as the eccentrically to control the descent. During the concentric, the hips extend. The glute max is the primary agonist, with the hamstrings acting as a synergist. The erector spinae function just isometrically to maintain a neutral posture, while the core musculature stabilizes your trunk. In the second variation, I'm performing a B-stance Romanian deadlift, where one foot is slightly staggered behind the other, acting. The movement pattern remains the same. I hinge at the hips, push them backward, lower the dumbbells under control, and then extend at the hips to return to the standing. Biomechanically, this is still a hip-dominant movement in the sagittal plane, but the staggered stance shifts more load onto one side, increasing the demand on the lead leg, glute, and hamstrings. The rear leg primarily acts as a balance assist rather than the primary mover. Compared to the bilateral RDL, this variation reduces total load potential slightly, but improves single leg strength development, balance, and intermuscular coordination, making it a useful progression towards a fully unilateral movements. like I said, progression. So this can be used typically in rehab as well as fixing asymmetries within musculature in the lower limbs. As we finish this last setup, notice how I'm maintaining a structured posture and containing a good controlled breathing pattern. Overall, the B-stance Romanian deadlift serves as a valuable progression between bilateral and fully unilateral movements. It allows for increased emphasis on one limb while still using that stable base of support, making it effective for developing that unilateral strength and improving that movement symmetry. And just overall reinforcing those proper hip mechanics, because hinging is very difficult. In the final variation, I'm performing a full unilateral Romanian deadlift with assistance on the hand. Where one leg is working while the other is off the ground, I use a slight support for balance. To perform the movement, I hinge at the hips while extending the non-working leg backwards, maintaining alignment from the head to the heel. The dumbbell lowers as my torso leans forward, and then I return to the standing by driving the hips forward. The joint action remains as hip flexion and extension, but now the movement places a much greater demand on balance, proprioception, and neuromuscular control. The glute max is still the primary agonist. The hamstrings assist in the hip extension and control the eccentric phase. The glutes medius and minimus play a major role in stabilizing, preventing pelvic drop, and maintaining frontal plane control. Because the base of support is reduced, the core musculature must work much harder to resist rotation and maintain the alignment. The use of assistance helps maintain proper movement mechanics, allowing for better focus on the working limb without excessive balance limitations. Otherwise, I'd just be falling over constantly. Overall, this variation is highly effective for developing the unilateral strength, correcting imbalances, and improving stability, while still reinforcing proper hip hinge mechanics. Before we conclude the dumbbell modality, one important biomechanical aspect of the Romanian deadlift is that, unlike a squat pattern, the movement is hip dominant rather than knee dominant. Throughout the exercise, the knee maintains only a slight degree of flexion and does not go through large ranges of motion. Instead of actively bending and straightening at the knee, the focus is on hinging at the hip, where the majority of the movement occurs. This means the hamstrings function as both the extensors and the stabilizers at the knee joint, maintaining that slight knee flexion isometrically rather than the dynamically extending the knee like a squat or a lunge. As I return to the top of the movement, the primary action is hip extension, driven by the gluteus maximus rather than the knee extension from the quadriceps. This distinction is what classifies an RDL as a true posterior chain hip hinge movement, emphasizing the load on strengthening of the muscles responsible for hip extension. This next set of movements uses a partner-assisted modality, which allows us to manipulate resistance and provide assistance or additional load throughout the range of motion. I'll be demonstrating bilateral bicep curls, unilateral bicep curls, and unilateral tricep extensions, focusing on controlled movement and muscular activation. In this first variation, I'm performing a partner-assisted bilateral bicep curl. To execute the movement, I start with my arms fully extended at my sides. I flex at the elbow joint, bringing my hands up towards my shoulders while my partner applies manual resistance during the movement. I then lower the weight back down under control. From a biomechanical standpoint, this movement occurs in the sagittal plane about the mediolateral axis, involving elbow flexion and extension. During the concentric phase, the biceps brachii act as the primary agonist for elbow flexion. The brachialis and the brachiradialis assist as the synergist. During the eccentric phase, these same muscles act as eccentrically to control the descent, often against increased partner-applied resistance. A key benefit of a partner resistance is the ability of variable resistance throughout the same range of motion, increasing time under tension and emphasizing both concentric and eccentric phases. Because both arms are working simultaneously, this allows for greater overall force production, making it effective for building muscular strength and hypertrophy in the elbow flexor specifically. In the second variation, I'm performing with the partner again, but this time it's partner-assisted unilateral bicep curls, working one arm at a time. The movement is the same. Starting with the arm extended, I flex at the elbow to bring the hand towards the shoulder while my partner applies resistance, then controlling the lower phase. Biomechanically, this still involves elbow flexion and extension in the sagittal plane, but now the focus shifts towards one limb, increasing the demand for isolation and control. Because this is unilateral, it helps identify the correct bilateral strength asymmetries, ensuring each arm produces force independently. Additionally, the partner can better match resistance to the strength curve of the movement, applying more force where the muscle is strongest and less where it is weaker, enhancing overall neuromuscular efficiency. Compared to the bilateral version, this variation increases focus, control, and muscular activation and isolation while reducing total load. In this variation, I'm performing a partner-assisted unilateral tricep extension. I start with my elbow flexed, and then I extend at the elbow to straighten my arm against my partner's resistance, and then return under control. This movement occurs in the sagittal plane with the triceps brachii acting as the primary agonist for elbow extension. The key cues I'm focusing on is keep my upper arm fixed and only move at the elbow, fully extend and squeeze at the triceps at the top, and control the eccentric and don't let it drop. The partner allows for the more controlled resistance, especially during the lowering phase, making this more effective in improving strength, control, and muscular activation throughout the whole movement. This next set of movement uses a partner-assisted modality to target the knee joint through both flexion and extension. I'll be demonstrating lying hamstring curls, standing hamstring curls, and quadricep extensions, focusing on proper joint actions, muscle activation, and control. The variation 1 is the lying hamstring curl. I start in a prone position with my legs fully extended. From here, I flex at the knee joint, bringing my heel towards my glutes, and my partner applies resistance. I then slowly lower my leg back to the starting position as the resistance is the opposite way. Biomechanically, this movement occurs in the sagittal plane about the mediolateral axis, involving knee flexion and extension. During the concentric phase, the hamstring group is the primary agonist. During the eccentric phase, these muscles control the return into knee extension. Because the hips are in a relatively extended position, the hamstrings are working across both the hip and the knee joints, increasing their contribution to force production. The key cues I have are keep my hips down and avoid excessive lumbar extension so my butt's not lifting. Curl through the hamstrings, not the moment, so making sure your partner understands the proper resistance profile is really key to this movement too. The partner resistance allows for increased resistance, especially during the eccentric phase, improving muscle tension and strength throughout the entire movement. Another important distinction is that the lying hamstring curl is an isolation single joint exercise, meaning the movement is occurring only at the knee joint. Unlike movements like the RDLs or the lunges involving the knee and the hips, this is single joint movement. This exercise places a more direct emphasis on the hamstrings as a primary knee flexor rather than sharing the load across multiple muscle groups along both joints. This makes it especially useful in situations where the goal is to improve targeted hamstring strength. So if you had a previous injury, increasing muscle hypertrophy through the focused tension. So if we're just trying to grow the muscle, or just address muscular imbalances between both hamstrings or even the quadriceps and just the lower limbs in general. From a programming standpoint, this movement is typically used as an accessory exercise, often performed after compound lifts, to further fatigue the hamstrings without really placing excessive load on the spine and just increasing the overall peripheral fatigue. Additionally, because it is performed at a controlled and supported position, it's beneficial reinforcing mind-muscle connection and improving the neuromuscular activation in the hamstrings. In the second variation, I'm performing a partner-assisted standing hamstring curl variation. I begin the standing upright, then flexing at the knee, bringing my heel towards my glutes while maintaining an upright posture and return under control. This movement also occurs in the sagittal plane involving knee flexion and extension, with the hamstrings acting as a primary agonist. However, because I'm in a standing position, this introduces a greater demand for balance, stabilization, and requiring activation of the gluteus medius and the core musculature to maintain alignment. Additionally, the position of the hip slightly alters the length-tension relationship of the hamstrings, which can influence how much force is produced throughout the movement. Some cues I really focus on are keeping my thigh still, only moving at the knee joint specifically, not allowing for my knee to push forward too much. I stay upright and avoid forward leaning, similar cause here, not trying to move the knee or the hips too much. Control both the lift and the lowering phase. So this is also important for your partner to assist
in this final
really by enforcing a lot of force where you're weakest or you're strongest and a little bit less where you're weakest.
And then extend at the knee joint.
Compared to the line variation, this variation increases neuromuscular coordination and stability demands while still effectively targeting the hamstrings at a very isolated rate. During the concentric phase, the quads act as the primary agonist for the knee extension. During the eccentric phase, they control the return into the knee flexion. Because the rectus femoris crosses at the hip and the knee joint, hip position can really influence and contribution in the movement. So where you're seated like this, the rectus femoris would not nearly as be incorporated, whereas if you're laying prone. Some cues I use are fully extending at the knee and contracting quads at the top. So we're really going to be squeezing the quad itself at the top rather than just moving weight. We're going to actually be forcefully contracting the targeted muscle. Another cue is to avoid swinging, keep the movement controlled, which also is important for your partner to not be ridiculous with their force production. Maintaining a stable torso and consistent posture is also key to this. As you can see, I'm grabbing the bottom of the chair or the sides of the chair to increase the stability, to really focus on the quad isolation. Together, these movements target both the knee flexors and extensors, helping to improve muscular imbalances, joint stability, and overall lower body function. We did these both with hamstring curls and the quad extensions. These next movements use a Swiss ball modality, which introduces instability to increase the demand for core stabilization, neuromuscular control, and proprioception. I'll be demonstrating a Swiss ball rollout, Swiss ball plank, and a Swiss ball pause rollout, each progressively getting difficult. Variation 1 is just the Swiss ball rollout, as you can see here now. In this first variation, I'm going to be starting with my forearms on the ball and my body in a straight line. From here, I roll the ball forward, extending at the shoulders while maintaining a neutral spine, then pull the ball back into the starting position. Biomechanically, this movement occurs primarily in the sagittal plane, involving shoulder flexion extension, while the core resists lumbar extension. The rectus abdominis and the transverse abdominis act isometrically to prevent excessive arching of the lower back, while the shoulder stabilizers control the movement of the ball. Cues I'm focusing on here is to keep my core braced and my ribs down, while maintaining a neutral spine. I don't let my hips sag. In the second variation, I'll be planking. This is going to be where I completely roll out, where my forearms are fully extended while maintaining a neutral spine, holding for as long as I can. Although there is no visible joint motion, this is an isometric exercise where the core musculature works to resist the movement. The body is fighting against gravity and instability, primarily resisting lumbar extension and rotational forces because of the spherical circumference of the ball. In the third variation, I roll the ball out forward into a full extension, then pause briefly in the extended position before returning to the start. Biomechanics remain similar. Shoulder flexion and extension in the sagittal plane with the core resisting lumbar extension, but the pause increases time under tension and demands greater control. At the extended position, the moment arm increases, meaning that the core must produce more force to maintain the spinal stability. The cues I was using there were the hold extended position and the flight against extension. So we're fighting against that extension. Don't lose the tension and stay braced during the pause. In this variation, I'm performing a Swiss ball pike. I start in a plank with my feet on the ball, then flex at the hips, pulling the ball forward towards my hands as I raise my hips up and return under control. The movement occurs in the sagittal plane involving hip flexion, while the core stabilizes against lumbar flexion. As you can see, this is more of an advanced movement, as the setup alone took me a little bit to get into, and the dismount was also pretty tough. As we switch into the next variation, this one is more so of a beginner movement, whereas we're going to be placing our feet into a plank position with the legs on the yoga ball, but this time our knees are going to be doing the curling, where we're still going to be piking with those glutes, and we're going to be hinging at the hips along the medial lateral axis and in the sagittal plane, but this is going to be much easier as the moment arm is not nearly as long as if we were going to have our feet on the ball. I'm really focusing on keeping my core braced and my ribs down and not letting my lower back arch too much, and just maintaining that stiff board upper back, mid back. And I'm also maintaining that good control, slow breathing, and breathing out on the concentric and in on the eccentric. And the final variation is the hardest variation, as we're going to be performing a Swiss ball pike hold. I bring my hips onto the pike position, and I hold at the top position, isometrically maintaining balance and control. As I said earlier, The dismount and just getting onto it in the first place is very difficult, so take your time and work up to this. As you can see, I finally get to that position and now I'm beginning to hold. A lot of the weight and the pressure is shifted up into my upper chest and shoulders and arm extremities, including my triceps and my anterior delts, and even a lot of the stabilizers in your rotator cuffs. Some cues I'm using are keeping my hips high and my core tight, staying balanced and controlled, and don't let the ball move. As you can see, the dismount was not clean. This next movement is a barbell bench press, a multi-joint upper body pushing exercise across all variations. I'm maintaining proper 5-point contact, including the head, shoulders, and glutes on the bench, and the feet flat on the floor. But from a biomechanical standpoint, the bench press is primarily performed in the transverse plane due to the horizontal shoulder adduction being the main movement at the shoulder. However, it also involves elbow extension in the sagittal plane, making it a multi-joint, multi-planar movement. In the first variation, I'm performing a standard grip barbell bench press. I begin by setting my 5-point contact, retracting and depressing my scapula to create a stable base. I lower the bar under control to my mid-chest by flexing the shoulder and the elbow. Then press the bar upward and the horizontal shoulder adduction and elbow extension occur. During the concentric phase, the pectoralis major acts as the primary agonist, the triceps brachii extend the elbow, and the anterior deltoids assist. The next variation is the wide grip bench press, as I'm performing this with my hands a little bit wider gripped than before. The wider grip will increase horizontal shoulder adduction, placing more emphasis on the pec major, while reducing the contribution of the triceps due to the decreased elbow's range of motion in this movement pattern. In the third variation, the narrow grip bench press has a little bit opposite than the wide grip effects. As we put a narrow grip, my hands are placed closer together. I'm still maintaining that 5-point contact, and this variation includes more demand of elbow extension and placing greater emphasis on the triceps brachii, while still involving the chest and shoulders, but a little bit less than before. The increased range of motion at the elbow also increased time under tension, particularly for the triceps specifically. By adjusting the grip width, we can manipulate muscle recruitment, joint angles, and force production while maintaining the same foundational movement pattern of the bench press itself. This next movement is a barbell back squat, a multi-joint lower body exercise used to develop strength, coordination, and force production. I'm maintaining proper technique, including a stable base of support, neutral spine, a bar placement across the upper back. From a biomechanical standpoint, the squat occurs in the sagittal plane involving the hip-knee flexion during the descent, followed by hip and knee extension during the ascent, with the ankle moving through the dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. At the top of the movement, I reach triple extension, which is where the hips, knees, and ankles are fully extended, which is key for force production in many athletic movements. The first variation I'm doing is a deep squat. I initiate the movement by sitting back in my hips and down while I'm allowing the knees to track forward, then driving upward by extending the hips and knees to return standing into a triple full extension. During the concentric phase, the gluteus maximus is the primary agonist for the hip extension, the quadriceps extend the knee, the hamstrings assist as stabilizers. In this variation, I'm performing a bench squat, where I descend under control and I lightly contact the bench, then return to standing. The movement still involves hip and knee flexion and extension in the sagittal plane, but the bench provides a consistent depth standard and reduces the use of the stretch and reflex. This means I must generate force from a more static position, increasing the demand from a starting strength and control. After contacting the bench, I drive upward, and whenever I hips and knees fully extend, I reach triple extension. The cues I'm focusing on are the control the descent, don't collapse onto the bench, and then stay tight at the bottom, then drive through my feet, finish tall at that triple extension. In this third variation, elevating my heels increases ankle dorsiflexion, allowing a more upright torso position and placing greater emphasis on the quadriceps. This also increases the demand on hip flexion compared to the standard squat. This variation is especially useful for targeting the quadriceps strength and improving movement in individuals with limited ankle mobility specifically. Across all squat variations, achieving proper triple extension at the top ensures full force production, while adjusting depth and positioning allows us to manipulate muscle recruitment, mobility demands, and overall stability requirements for said movement. Nailing down a solid squat pattern is essential for many athletes. This next set of movements uses a band modality to perform rowing patterns targeting the back musculature. Bands provided variable resistance, meaning tension increases as the band is stretched, placing greater demand at the end range of motion. Biomechanically, these movements primarily occur in the transverse plane, involving shoulder extension and horizontal abduction, along with scapular retraction. The elbow moves through flexion and extension in the sagittal plane. In the first variation, I'm performing a bilateral banded lat row. I start with my arms fully extended, then pull the band towards my torso by extending at the shoulder and flexing at the elbow. While retracting my scapula, I then return my under control. During the concentric phase, the latimus dorsi acts as the primary agonist for shoulder extension. The rhomboids and the middle trapezius retract the scapula, and the biceps brachii assist for the elbow flexion. And the second variation is a unilateral banded lat row. Working one arm at a time, the movement remains the same, pulling the band towards the body through shoulder extension and elbow flexion, but now the load is applied to one side. This introduces greater demand for core stabilization, particularly anti-rotationals, as the body resists being pulled toward the band. Some cues I'm really using in this is keeping my torso square and don't allowing for me to rotate. As you can see, my hand is bracing for stability as I'm grabbing my rib cage. Focus on the contraction on the working side. Really drive that elbow back and down. Really drive that back and squeeze the lats. We're not just moving the weight, we're allowing our back to fully contract. This variation effectively allows for unilateral strength, coordination, and correcting imbalances between the lats and other back scapular and musculature. As we finish the set and shift in our final variation, we're going to be performing our unilateral wide pronated grip banded row. I start with my arm extended and then pull the band towards my upper torso by combining horizontal abduction at the shoulder with the scapular retraction. While keeping my elbow higher and to the outside, I then return under control. Biomechanically, this movement still occurs in the transverse plane, but at the wider pronated grip shifts emphasis from the lats mainly to the upper back musculature, including the posterior delts, the rhomboids, and the middle trapezius. Because this is unilateral, there is increased demand for core stabilization and the anti-rotation as the body resists being pulled toward the band. The key cues I'm using is keeping my elbows high and to the outside. Keep my torso square and don't rotate. Focus on squeezing my upper back at the end. This variation is highly effective for improving scapular control, upper back development, and unilateral stability. First, I'm performing a flat clamshell with my shoulders fully supported on the ground to isolate the hip musculature while minimizing upper body movement. This movement primarily occurs at the hip joint, involving hip abduction and external rotation. The glute medius is the primary agonist with assistance from the glute minimus and deep external rotators such as the piriformis by keeping my pelvis stacked and stable. I'm preventing compensatory trunk rotation and ensuring the movement is isolated at the hip. The bottom leg and torso remain relatively passive, while the top leg performs a controlled concentric phase. During abduction and eccentric phase, it also is mainly occurring as it returns to the starting position. From a neuromuscular standpoint, this exercise improves motor unit recruitment of the lateral hip stabilizers and reinforces proper femoral alignment. Beyond training, these banded clamshell variations have a strong application in daily movement and functional tasks. The emphasis on hip adduction, external rotation, and lumbopelvic stability directly translates in activates such as walking, stair climbing, running, or even just prolonged standing. During gait, for example, the glutes play a huge role in stabilizing the pelvis in the single leg stance phase. Weakness in that muscle can drop the compensations, and as contralateral hip drop will occur, also known as a Trendelenburg pattern. These progressions are also reinforced as the ability to maintain proximal stability for distal mobility, meaning that the core and hips provide a stable base that allows efficient movement of the limbs. This is essential for not only athletic performance, but just injury prevention in everyday life, and just functionality. We then start to progress into a forearm plank banded clamshell. This is going to increase the complexity by integrating core stabilization with maintaining the same hip movement.
In this variation, the exercise still involves hip abduction, the external rotation still occurs, and it's still going to be targeting the glute max and medius. But now the body is also put into an isometric plank position, and now we must maintain this hold. The core musculature, including the transverse abdominis, rectus abdominis, and obliques, work to resist lumbar extension and maintain a neutral spine at the same time. The glutes contribute to pelvic stability. The addition of the plank position increases closed chain stability demands, requiring coordinated activation across the kinetic chain. The stance side hip must stabilize isometrically, while the moving leg performs controlled abduction against band resistance. This progression enhances neuromuscular coordination, improves lumbopelvic stability, and reinforces the ability to produce movement at the hip while maintaining that trunk control, which is critical for athletic performance and compound lifts, and even in everyday life, as there is many unexpected incidents that can happen. And as we finally go into the final progression, a high plank banded clamshell, which represents the most advanced variation due to the increased demands of both upper body and core stability. This movement still emphasizes the hip abduction and external rotation while still targeting the glute medius, but now it's going to incorporate a much greater full body stabilization. With the body supported on the hands, the shoulders are in flexion, requiring increased activation from the serratus anterior, the serratus anterior deltoid, and the scapular positioning overall. The core musculature also is going to consist of resisting the lumbar extension and maintaining the neutral spine. The instability created by lifting one leg against the band increases the demand for anti-rotational and pelvic control. This is requiring just overall stability and the stance leg glutes and core to work synergistically. This advanced progression improves dynamic stability and enhances force transfer across your kinetic chain as well, and prepares the body for the complex multiple joint movements that require both strength and control with precision involved as well. As you can see that I'm finishing up this set, I'm using my other hand to help with the stabilization of my overall core. If you take this away, more of your core stabilizers will need to be involved. Some cues we want to really focus on are stacking your hips and your shoulders. This will also help you prevent that trunk rotation. As you can see, that stability, there's one clean line within my wrist, elbow, and shoulder. You want to stack those joints. As I transition into the cool down phase of today's workout, right now the goal is just to gradually bring my body back down to baseline. Instead of stopping everything abruptly, I'm going to ease into that slow progression. Throughout this session, we started with the dynamic warm-up that focused on increasing core temperature, improving mobility, and activating key muscle groups. That's important because it helps improve our neuromuscular efficiency and prepares the joints and the muscles for more demanding movements. From there, the workout itself emphasized a mix of stability and controlled force production, especially with the banded exercise we use. A lot of these movements targeted the hip stabilizers, core musculature, and upper body pushing and pulling patterns, which play a big role in maintaining proper movement mechanics and overall performance. Now during this cool down, I'm just walking at a low intensity, keeping the body moving to promote active recovery. This helps maintain circulation, which can assist with clearing out that metabolic byproducts and reducing post-exercise fatigue, basically. It also allows our cardiovascular system to gradually return to resting levels, because we just spike those levels and want to ease them back down rather than abruptly getting there, instead of getting the heart rate to drop instantly. Another important aspect here is that this phase helps shift the body towards more a parasympathetic state, which basically means that we're moving into a more relaxed, recovery-focused condition, whereas if we were not in this state, we would be in a more difficult state to actually start our recovery process, which can be very long the more advanced you get. After this, I can incorporate some slow controlled stretching, mobility work, to help restore range of motion and reduce any
residual tightness from the workout. They're not going to be long, super slow, static stretching, but they're going to be a lot of getting into deep ranges, expanding those ranges, and really allowing our muscles and our joints to decompress. So even though the intensity is low here, this is still a really important part of the overall training process to give our recovery a head start right at the end of this workout rather than a slow start into tomorrow, because we don't know exactly how fast we're going to start getting that recovery process. If we can begin the recovery process right after the workout ends, this would be much more beneficial, so we have more time to be in the overall recovery stage. This is called epoch. So as you can see, I started this treadmill walk at a little bit higher rate of speed, which was 3 miles per hour. I also had the incline at about 3 degrees. So as the workout progressed and the cooldown progressed, I eased these down to about 1.5 and the walk began into basically a halt. This allowed me to ease into the next movement, which was our heel to toe walks. These are going to help reinforce our lower body stability and improve balance during gait. This movement primarily challenges the ankle joint and involves dorsiflexion and plantar flexion as I transition from heel strike to toe off in the tibialis anterior. Next, I'm performing cat-cow movements to improve mobility through the spine and reinforce controlled movement of the trunk. This exercise takes place in the spine in alternating phases of spinal flexion and spinal extension. During the cat phase, I'm moving into flexion by rounding the back and engaging the rectus abdominis and deep core musculature. During the cow phase, I move into extension, allowing the chest to open, while the spinal extensors, including the rectus spinae, become more active. I'm focusing on moving segmentally through the spine rather than rushing through the motion to improve overall spinal mobility and control too. The shoulders and the hips remain relatively stable, while the movement is driven through the vertebral column, promoting better coordination between pelvis and the trunk. From a functional standpoint, this exercise helps from improving postural awareness, reducing stiffness, and restoring normal movement patterns after training especially. As part of the cooldown, cat-cows really help bring your body to a really relaxed state while still maintaining that circulation, especially in the spinal structures. The next thing we're going to is the bird dog. Is a quadruped stability exercise that focuses on the core control and coordination across the body. From this position, I'm extending opposite arm and opposite leg contralaterally, which creates a demand for anti-rotation and anti-extension through the core. The goal is to maintain a neutral spine while moving the limbs rather than allowing the hips or lower back to compensate with this. The primary muscles involved during the include the transverse abdominis, the obliques for deep core stabilization, and the erector spinae for spinal support. The glutes and your serratus anterior are also going to be moving as your upper extremities and lower extremities are moving contralaterally. Next, I'm performing thread and needle, a mobility exercise that targets the thoracic spine rotation and improves upper body movement quality. Starting in a quadruped position again, I reach one arm underneath my body, moving into the thoracic rotation and slight flexion. Then I reverse motion, opening up through the chest and thoracic extension and rotation. The movement is driven through the thoracic spine while the hips may remain stable. Your knees should maintain the ground while maintaining your other hand on the ground as well. Key muscles involved include the obliques or deep core musculature, along with your scapular stabilizers and posterior shoulders. Really get a deep contraction and stretching in the chest at the top movement, and get a deep stretch in your lower back scapula and upper back scapula at the bottom. This exercise is especially beneficial after upper body training as it helps restore rotational mobility, reduce stiffness in the shoulders and upper back especially, and just improve your overall postural alignment. As part of the cooldown, thread the needle promotes relaxation, increases the blood flow in that area, especially your upper back, and helps return the body to a more recovered and mobile state. I really want to focus on a controlled, smooth movement, allowing the shoulder and upper back to move freely while my lower body stays stable.
The next upcoming movement I'm going to perform is a squat pattern sequence combining hinging, deep squats, and lateral weight shifting to reinforce full lower body mobility and control. We're going to really focus on those glutes, hamstrings, adductors, your dorsiflexion, so your gastrocnemius, your anterior tibialis as well is going to be worked. This is a very compound focused lower body cool down movement. I'm starting with the hip hinge, emphasizing hip flexion while maintaining the neutral spine. This targets the posterior chain, including the hamstrings and glutes, and helps reinforce the proper loading mechanics and hip hinging properties. From there, I transition into a deep squat involving hip flexion, knee flexion, ankle dorsiflexion. The primary muscles here include the quadriceps, glutes, adductors, while the core works to stabilize the trunk. At the bottom position, I shift side to side, introducing movement in the frontal plane. This emphasizes hip adduction and abduction, targeting the adductors and the glute medius, while also improving mobility and control with the hips. This sequence integrates multiple joint actions, planes of motion, and improves overall movement quality, coordination, and that range of motion again. As part of this cooldown, it helps restore the natural movement patterns, reduce the stiffness in the lower legs, and reinforce those proper squat mechanics for future training sessions again. Like we said from earlier, our whole purpose of the cooldown is to get a head start on the recovery and aid the next future training sessions. This controlled breathing exercise we have begins with raising my arms overhead during a slow inhale, the holding briefly, and then slowly exhaling as I bring them back down to my sides. During the inhale, I'm focusing on the diaphragmatic breathing, allowing the diaphragm to contract the ribcage and expand. This promotes deeper, more efficient breathing compared to shallow chest breathing. As I exhale slowly, I'm emphasizing full relaxation, allowing the parasympathetic nervous system, like we spoke about earlier, to take over. This helps reduce heart rate, lower stress levels, and shift the body into a recovery state. The coordinated arm movement also encourages thoracic expansion and mobility. We're really going to be reaching to the sun, reaching to the side, reaching to all the walls in the room. Feel that those scapular extract. Feel the upper back extremities move around. Feel your anterior or your posterior delts and even your chest get stretched. The coordinated arm movement really is going to allow for that thoracic expansion and mobility, while reinforcing a smooth breathing pattern. Now I'm finishing with the dead hang, which is a passive hanging position used to promote spinal decompression. As you can see, I'm slightly using my lats to carry over my side to each left and right. This allows for greater stretch and contraction in those lats and upper extremities in the upper back, scapula, your upper trapezius, your posterior delts, and your rhomboids as well. We're going to finish this whole workout up with some arm swings. We're going to fully extract. We're going to feel those scapulars up at the wings, and we're going to come and cross our arms and slap our backs. This allows for great decompression and allowing for the elastic property that we talked about earlier. This is going to really get those blood flow going in our upper back and our upper chest and just allow for a good cool down for the last movement of the day.